Hi guys, I think I'm going to go ahead and initiate this video. I'm probably going to title this video something along the lines of having a smoke and maybe talking a little bit of world history, things going on internationally. The world really is ever changing, and the more it changes, we realize as technology advances, the world becomes more socially networked, and people are more find themselves more relatable to others. A lot of conflicts arise, and just with social media and the press and everything, infantry technology arising, and just everything along the lines of economy and just everything influencing and affecting us. We see how the world has changed over time so drastically, and there's always been some war going on Earth. There has been war on Earth, I believe, since well into like 2000 BC, and even then, basically there is still about 0 years that the Earth has experienced without some war going on in some country, particularly in the Middle East. I think a lot of the time we look to the Middle East in terms of advancements during the ancient era, and whether it be Mesopotamia and Sumeria, etc., being some of the earliest known civilizations. We still know that there were advanced civilizations who had tools and mud architecture and artwork, extremely interesting developments. Even 15,000 years ago, as I was saying, if I asked you guys, what would you think would be the darkest time in history for humans altogether? And some would say, oh, it's definitely got to be the Black Plague, or it's got to be World War I or World War II. And I'll get to that in a little bit. So comment below while I'm lighting up the cigarette what you think was the darkest time in human history, and I'll tell you what, after I light it, actually was considered by many Western historians to be the darkest time in history. And this is Pall Blue here. This is the last one I have of this pack. So I'm always like stressing when I'm like, oh, I have to go to the gas station, or I have to go to Kmart, or not Kmart, Albertsons or somewhere like that, whatever your local grocer is. But I actually do have an extra pack here, so I don't need to worry about that. I'm pretty much set for tomorrow. Pall Blue, great smokes. They last really long, and I'm signature wise, I'm definitely a blue smokes guy. They're a little bit light, and at the same time they give you a good burst of flavor. So if you guys already haven't commented below what you think was the darkest time in human history, I will tell you now. And of course, this is a differential thing. Opinions may differ quite a bit, and some would say the bubonic plague, as I mentioned, or various wars. Actually, according to many historians on this link I read, they say that the worst time in human history was actually in around the 6th century AD, right around 536 or so, if I'm not incorrect. And it was a time when there was actually so much volcanic activity, and this is like near the ending of the ancient Roman Empire. They've already kind of reached the Constantine era, so there's that going on, where the Roman Empire is now collectively Christian, which is, I suppose, a good thing morally for them, judgment-wise. So there's so much volcanic activity going on that famine actually hit a huge part of Europe and a huge part of Serbia and the Middle East and Northern Africa, that there was such bad famine, and this goes undocumented, I think, in a lot of high school and college history lessons, that just millions of people died across the board. Cattle couldn't be raised, crops couldn't be grown, and there was just utter devastation. And it was actually more detrimental to the East, especially the Eastern Hemisphere, than the bubonic plague was in Europe. So it was right around the 6th century, 500s, and it was just because of volcanic ash blocking the sky, and crops couldn't be grown. It was just major famine. And rarely, prior to reading that article, would I look back and think, oh, in the 500s, they, oh, that was the time when Rome was doing this and that, and there were a few things going on with the Israelis, and perhaps some Germanic tribes forming up north. But other than that, I'm just shocked and kind of abashed that that was actually the primary event going on, well into about 600 when the 600s, when things started getting better and gradually picking up again, because people were so reliant on nature that they didn't have any kind of technological eco farms where they could grow things naturally if such a disaster occurred. That's why I think that Norway, I believe it's Norway, has all of those hidden seed farms in Svalbard, north of Russia, in case such a thing like volcanic activity does happen again. Now, I do reside in Wyoming. Some people I talk to online are like, I'm kind of a little bit iffy to reveal what kind of state I'm living in. You know, it's like, okay, I'll tell you, I'm in Oregon, and I'm like, ooh, you're in Oregon. You know, that reveals so much about you. You must be really scared of stalkers. And I understand that to a degree, you know, due to some people being such investigative hackers and, you know, terrible people. And when it comes to invading others' privacies, here and there, some folks are like that sprinkled. Forget them. But I am in Wyoming, and I do feel like if there was somehow the Yellowstone volcano to erupt, I would be one of the first people probably affected within that million or so people range, being in central Wyoming. But everyone I've talked to about it who has any know-how of seismology or geology says the chances of it happening, especially links I've read, the chances of it happening are so low and minuscule in not only our lifetimes, but our great, you know, 15 greats, grandchildren's lives, that there's really nothing to worry about. It hasn't gone off for some several 100,000 years, and people are saying, well, it's kind of breaching that point, you know, so some would fantasize about the dystopian afterlife, so to say, that would follow such a disastrous event. I like a little bit of fun chaos in my life, going to a bar or a party here now and then, but definitely nothing like that. I would never look forward to a volcanic eruption occurring, especially one as detrimental as the Yellowstone volcano. Speaking of war, more or less, and chaos, there are some cool RPG video games that I've looked into. I'm not a huge gamer, and you know, if I was, obviously I would be sharing with you guys my Fortnite videos or something like that. But when it comes to video games and watching friends play them, I'm kind of more into like the, you know, classic realism of like Call of Duty and whatnot. I have played a little Call of Duty. I like to be the kind of grenadier guy who throws grenades or has like heavy machine guns. I'm not much of a sniper at all when it comes to video games. There's one RPG that I've seen that was on YouTube here, and someone was playing as the Rebel Battalion, I believe, like South Carolina so-and-so infantry unit in Civil War. So it was a Civil War-based RPG, and they were getting involved. Very realistic. Realistic is the best way to describe this particular RPG. If you guys know the name of it, it's just basically a first-person point of view. You get to choose to be Union or Confederacy, and you basically go into it and you go through miles and miles of forest, and you can run around basically as far as you want to, and you have to regroup with, say, like 20 or 30 so men, and then you get together and then you find the dark blue dot or the gray dot of the Confederacy, and you charge against your enemy, whichever side you choose. It's really fun stuff. Definitely wouldn't want to be alive in that particular time in 1860s America. That was definitely our bloodiest war here. And you know, following up to that, some say that James Buchanan was the president prior to Lincoln in the 1850s, who was responsible for kind of starting off the Civil War, because he was so irresponsible with just communication in relation to like people who were more or less geared towards slavery, or you know, he was unclear in his diplomacy with those, and was too much of a sympathizer with the slave owners. So he was very unfortunately accused of being just too passive, I believe, too passive when it came to the Southerners, and he should have been more active in response to them and their self-dignified manner of declaring the Confederacy in the first place, just because of slavery and how important it was for the economy back then, and how certain slaves loved being and needed to be slaves in the first place. You know, crazy kind of 19th century mentality of many Southerners. I really enjoy doing these talks. They're really fun. Thank you guys for watching. If you just like hearing me go on, and if you have any fun comments to sputter out there on the keyboard. I actually was just about 20 minutes ago listening to a Joseph Goebbels speech, and I have studied the Holocaust quite extensively in college. I might go back just to be a history major, just to declare a liberal arts program or something like that. It's very intriguing stuff to me, and the whole morbidity of the Holocaust and World War II. It's very intriguing to me, like something that I should know about as a person who considers myself somewhat intellectual. And Joseph Goebbels, in his final speech, it's a video on YouTube that you guys can find. It's very offensive to some, I'm sure, so be careful if you watch it or show it to anyone. It's basically Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister of the National Socialist Germany. He was going on about various things like, you know, don't give up on Hitler. You know, we have to kind of get rid of the Red Plague. Germany has been battered from every single perspective, and geographically and mentally, and he was going on about how capitalists to the west and communists to the east kind of had this particular plan to destroy Germany, which was considered by himself, Goebbels, as the last kind of loyal state to humanity. And he definitely was playing the victim card. And one of the most foolish things that Hitler himself did at his stature in the German government was to betray Russia, was to betray the Soviet Union. And even though they were stalwarts against communism, being Nazis, of course, without a doubt, I would only expect them to want to invade Russia or have some kind of order where they executed innocent communists and innocent Poles who were supposedly Untermenschen. That was a very foolish thing on Hitler's part to do, to invade Russia in the first place, and we all know that and are fully aware of that. But yeah, at one point, if you guys weren't aware, Stalin and Hitler actually were somewhat buddy-buddy in a respectful manner from hundreds of miles away, and it was actually quite a surprise to Stalin when Hitler did invade. So yeah, Goebbels telling his people to fight to the last straw, raised the swastika banner instead of the white flag of surrender, which would have definitely saved thousands of lives in Berlin and all across Germany. Some say that if the Germans had won, if Germany had taken over the world, and if they would have per se not being enemies of England from the get-go, England being allies with Poland, and if Germany would have just taken Austria and left it at that, I'd say, not even setting foot in the Netherlands, setting foot in Belgium, poor Belgium being the battleground for centuries in various wars, I think that the world would have been definitely influenced in obviously a catastrophic way, to the point where, of course, people would be thinking differently now. Things would be so different technologically, perhaps even less so than they are nowadays. And what I'm getting at basically is that the age of decadence that we live in now would not exist. It would cease to exist. America was already in a quite positive light. I would say characteristically in culture. We had the Roaring '20s, we had the 1930s, which still had its own particular culture, and speakeasies were opening back up. You could declare that a certain extent to be an age of decadence in itself for the Americans, and people were enjoying themselves fully. I think if Germany had, on another hand, gone as far as to invade Poland and just left the USSR alone, Europe itself would be, of course, catastrophically different, and people would be viewing things completely differently today. Demographics would be catastrophically different. Politics would be changed. America would be influenced, and the whole West would be influenced dramatically in a different light. And of course, there were people. There were thousands of Nazis in the 1930s taking over Madison Square Garden in downtown New York in the 30s. And of course, there were people then who were fully aware of what the Nazis were into, what they wanted to kind of endure with their political agenda, which was at its base just pure anti-Semitism and raising the spear against people simply because they were born under a certain culture and believe in a specific gentle religion. And yeah, there were people fully aware of what the Nazis were doing. So to a certain extent, it is necessary to say that we were already in a sense in a psychological war with the Nazis and the Germans, but yeah, there are a lot of things going on in the world today. I'd say that now is definitely a time to be alive. We are at an impending trade war with China right now. I think in China they are burning or basically just being the classy Chinese that they are refraining from using Apple products to a certain extent. Many folks there have made that decision altogether, and I believe there was a particular obscure, to me kind of obscure, I don't read much into economic trade wars, but I believe there were some people trying to persecute the CEO or some member of some group who was responsible for Chinese phone technology basically and communications technology. I believe the company that was involved in that was Huawei, if I'm saying that right. And that person was basically persecuted and taken to trial recently. So obviously a lot of drama. If you're going to stir the pot across the Pacific, whether you be Chinese or American, things are going to happen, and some flames will ensue, as unfortunate as that may be. But anyway, I'm gonna get back to watching some fun documentaries, guys. Pall Blue, highly recommended. Thanks for chatting and smoking with me if you're into this kind of thing. And I will stop the video right about there.